The conference room erupted into chaos as the computer screens went black. Rachel Thompson, CEO of Phoenix Tech Solutions, stared in disbelief as her multi-million-dollar presentation vanished before the eyes of potential investors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what happened next would change everything she thought she knew about justice, family, and the incredible power of an 8-year-old's determination to protect the innocent. Marcus Rivera never imagined that working the night shift as a security guard at Phoenix Tech Solutions would lead to the most extraordinary chapter of his life. At 32, he had been patrolling the gleaming corridors of the downtown Seattle headquarters for nearly 2 years, his footsteps echoing through empty offices while the city slept outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The job paid enough to cover rent on their small apartment in Beacon Hill, keep food on the table, and occasionally splurge on the coding books that his daughter Zoe devoured with an intensity that both amazed and worried him. Zoe Rivera was unlike any 8-year-old Marcus had ever encountered. While her classmates spent their afternoons playing video games or watching cartoons, she sat, hunched over her second-hand laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she taught herself programming languages with the dedication of a scholar pursuing a doctorate. Python, JavaScript, HTML, even complex cybersecurity protocols, nothing seemed beyond her grasp. She approached each new challenge like a detective solving mysteries, finding patterns in code that adults with computer science degrees struggled to understand. The apartment they shared told the story of their journey together. Marcus had been raising Zoe alone since her mother Linda died in a car accident when Zoe was just 4 years old. The living room doubled as Zoe's classroom and laboratory, with stacks of programming books borrowed from the public library covering every available surface. Her drawings of computer circuits and flowcharts decorated the refrigerator alongside typical childhood artwork, creating a unique gallery that perfectly captured her extraordinary mind. Marcus often wondered where Zoe's incredible gift had originated. Neither he nor Linda had possessed any particular aptitude for technology, though Linda had always encouraged their daughter's curiosity about how things worked. Perhaps it was genetics expressing itself in unexpected ways. Or maybe it was Zoe's natural problem-solving instincts finding their perfect outlet in the logical world of computer programming. Whatever the source, Marcus supported his daughter's passion completely, even when it meant sacrificing his own needs to buy her the equipment and resources that fed her insatiable hunger for knowledge. Their evening routine had become a cherished ritual. Marcus would return from his security rounds to find Zoe still awake, despite his repeated reminders about bedtime, working on some new project that had captured her imagination. She might be designing a simple game, exploring network security protocols, or practicing ethical hacking techniques she had discovered in online tutorials. Her concentration was absolute, her joy in understanding complex systems infectious, and her natural instinct to use technology for helping others rather than personal gain reminded Marcus daily of her mother's generous spirit. Meanwhile, 30 floors above Marcus's security station, Rachel Thompson inhabited a world of boardrooms, power lunches, and decisions that affected thousands of employees across multiple continents. As the youngest CEO in Phoenix Tech Solutions history, she had inherited both the company and the immense pressure that came with managing a technology empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Her corner office overlooked Elliott Bay, its panoramic views serving as a constant reminder of how far she had climbed from her middle-class roots in Portland. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Rachel's rise to power had been meteoric but costly. She had sacrificed personal relationships, ignored her own emotional needs, and built walls around her heart that protected her from disappointment, but also prevented genuine connection. Her penthouse apartment in Belltown was filled with expensive art and designer furniture, but it felt more like a museum than a home. Success had brought her everything money could buy, but had left her feeling hollow and disconnected from the values that had once motivated her passion for technology. The irony wasn't lost on her that she ran a company dedicated to connecting people through innovative technology, while she herself felt more isolated with each passing day. Late nights at the office had become her norm, not because the work demanded it, but because returning to her empty apartment only emphasized the loneliness that expensive possessions couldn't fill. She had learned to trust spreadsheets and profit margins more than people, finding safety in numbers that couldn't betray or disappoint her the way human relationships inevitably seem to do. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning when 8-year-old Tommy Chen arrived at Roosevelt Elementary School, with tears streaming down his face. Zoe noticed immediately during recess that something was terribly wrong with her quiet classmate who usually sat alone during lunch, reading comic books about superheroes who saved the day with incredible powers. Tommy's backpack had been dumped in the hallway, his homework scattered across the floor like confetti, while 3 older boys from the 5th grade stood nearby laughing at his distress. Zoe watched from across the playground as the same group of bullies surrounded Tommy near the monkey bars, pushing him back and forth between them like a human pinball machine. Their leader, a tall boy named Derek Martinez, seemed to take particular pleasure in making Tommy stumble and fall, then mocking him when he struggled to get back up. The teachers on playground duty were busy dealing with other situations, completely unaware of the systematic torture happening just 20 feet away from their supervision. The bullying wasn't random or occasional. Zoe had been observing the pattern for weeks, documenting in her mind how Derek and his friends targeted Tommy with calculated cruelty that went far beyond typical childhood teasing. They stole his lunch money, hid his textbooks, and spread rumors about his family that made other students avoid him completely. Tommy had become a ghost in his own school, invisible to adults but hypervisible to predators who sensed his vulnerability and exploited it mercilessly. What made the situation even more heartbreaking was Tommy's complete silence about his suffering. He never reported the incidents to teachers, never fought back against his tormentors, and never asked for help from classmates who might have intervened. Zoe realized that Tommy had internalized the shame and helplessness that bullies deliberately cultivate in their victims, believing somehow that he deserved the treatment he received, or that speaking up would only make things worse for him. The breaking point came during computer class when Zoe witnessed Derek deliberately sabotage Tommy's science project presentation. Tommy had spent weeks preparing a digital slideshow about marine biology, complete with animations and interactive elements that demonstrated his genuine passion for ocean life. As Tommy began his presentation, Derek used his own computer to send malicious commands that crashed Tommy's file, destroying hours of careful work in seconds while making it appear that Tommy was simply incompetent with technology. The teacher, Mrs. Anderson, sighed with frustration and told Tommy he would receive a failing grade for his inability to properly prepare his presentation materials. Tommy stood frozen at the front of the classroom, his face burning with humiliation while Derek smirked from his seat in the back row. The injustice of the moment ignited something fierce and protective in Zoe's heart, a determination to use her abilities for something more important than personal projects or academic achievements. That evening, Zoe sat in her bedroom with her laptop open, her mind racing with possibilities and her fingers trembling with nervous energy. She had been teaching herself ethical hacking techniques for months, learning about network security, password protection, and digital forensics through online courses designed for college students and professional cybersecurity experts. Her natural talent for understanding complex systems had accelerated her learning beyond anything her teachers could have imagined possible for someone her age. The plan that formed in her mind was both simple and sophisticated. Phoenix Tech Solutions, where her father worked security, had recently partnered with the school district to provide educational technology services and digital learning platforms. This partnership meant that the school's computer systems were connected to Phoenix Tech's network through secure channels that most people assumed were impenetrable. But Zoe had discovered vulnerabilities in the network architecture during her late-night explorations of cybersecurity protocols. She knew that accessing the school's systems through Phoenix Tech's network would require bypassing multiple layers of security, including firewalls, encryption protocols, and user authentication systems that protected sensitive student and administrative data. The technical challenges were enormous, but Zoe's understanding of programming languages and network architecture had progressed to the point where she could visualize solutions that professional hackers would respect and admire. More importantly, Zoe had a plan that would expose Derek's pattern of cyberbullying while providing undeniable evidence of his systematic harassment of Tommy and other vulnerable students. She had noticed that Derek used school computers to send threatening messages, create fake social media accounts for mocking his victims, and coordinate group harassment campaigns that extended far beyond school hours into Tommy's home life through online platforms. The moral weight of what she was contemplating kept Zoe awake for hours that night. She understood that hacking into school systems, even with good intentions, was illegal and could result in serious consequences for both herself and her father. But she also understood that adults had failed Tommy completely, that the traditional channels for reporting bullying had proven useless, and that Derek's behavior was escalating towards something potentially dangerous for Tommy's physical and emotional safety. By 3 in the morning, Zoe had made her decision. She would use her abilities to gather evidence of Derek's cyberbullying activities, document the systematic harassment that teachers had missed or ignored, and present the information in a way that would force adults to take immediate action to protect Tommy and other victims. The plan required her to access Phoenix Tech's systems during her father's work shift, when security protocols might be slightly relaxed and her presence in the building wouldn't raise immediate suspicions. The next evening, Zoe convinced her father to bring her to work by claiming she needed his help with a challenging programming assignment that required access to more powerful computers than their home laptop could provide. Marcus, who had always supported his daughter's technological pursuits, agreed to let her accompany him to Phoenix Tech's headquarters, assuming she would spend a quiet few hours in the security office working on homework while he completed his rounds through the building. What Marcus didn't realize was that his daughter had been preparing for this night for weeks, studying building schematics, memorizing security procedures, and planning every detail of an operation that would either save Tommy from continued torment or destroy their family's peaceful life forever. As they rode the elevator to the 31st floor, Zoe felt her heart pounding with excitement and terror, knowing that the next few hours would test every skill she had learned and every moral principle her parents had taught her about using power responsibly. The Phoenix Tech building after hours was a maze of darkened corridors and humming servers, filled with the ghostly blue glow of emergency lighting and the constant whisper of climate control systems maintaining optimal conditions for millions of dollars worth of computer equipment. Zoe had memorized the layout from her father's casual descriptions of his nightly security rounds, but experiencing the building in person felt like entering a technological cathedral where she would either prove herself worthy of her extraordinary abilities or discover that some problems were too complex even for her remarkable mind to solve. Part 3. Conflict and Misunderstanding. The alarm started screaming at exactly 2:15 in the morning, piercing the silence of Phoenix Tech solutions like digital banshees announcing that their fortress had been breached. Red warning lights flooded the corridors as automated security protocols locked down every access point throughout the 30-story building. Marcus Rivera felt his blood turn to ice as he realized that the most sophisticated cybersecurity breach in the company's history was happening during his shift, with his 8-year-old daughter somewhere in the building. Emergency response teams flooded into the headquarters within minutes, their footsteps echoing through marble lobbies as they established command centers and began tracing the intrusion that had somehow bypassed millions of dollars worth of protective software. The breach wasn't random or typical. Someone had accessed the Educational Partnership Network, navigated through multiple security layers, and downloaded massive amounts of data from Roosevelt Elementary School's administrative systems before triggering additional alarms by attempting to access student disciplinary records. Rachel Thompson arrived at the building still wearing her silk pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat, her hair uncombed and her usual corporate composure completely shattered by panic and fury. Her assistant had called her with news that someone had penetrated their most sensitive systems, potentially exposing client data and threatening partnerships worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The timing couldn't have been worse, coming just days before a crucial board meeting, where investors would decide whether to approve her expansion into international markets. The forensic investigation revealed digital fingerprints that seemed impossible to believe. The hacker had demonstrated skills that professional cybersecurity experts would struggle to match, using advanced techniques that suggested years of training and experience. But the access point traced back to a computer terminal in the security office, and surveillance footage showed only Marcus Rivera and a small child who appeared to be doing homework while her father completed his rounds. Rachel's executive team gathered in the crisis management conference room, their faces grim, as they reviewed preliminary findings that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Someone with intimate knowledge of both Phoenix Tech's network architecture and Roosevelt Elementary's administrative systems had conducted what appeared to be a targeted operation designed to expose specific information about student harassment incidents. The precision and sophistication of the attack suggested either industrial espionage or something far more personal and dangerous. The Child Services investigation began within hours, triggered by mandatory reporting requirements when law enforcement discovered that a minor had potentially been involved in criminal activity. Social workers arrived at Marcus and Zoe's apartment with court orders and clipboards, their professionally sympathetic expressions barely concealing their shock at finding evidence of advanced hacking equipment and programming manuals scattered throughout what should have been a typical family home. Marcus watched helplessly as strangers examined his daughter's belongings, photographed her computer setup, and asked questions that seemed designed to establish whether he had been exploiting her abilities for criminal purposes. The investigators clearly struggled to understand how an 8-year-old could have acquired the technical knowledge necessary to breach corporate security systems, leading them to assume that Marcus must have been coaching her or using her as a front for his own illegal activities. Zoe sat silently during the interrogation, her usually bright eyes dulled with confusion and fear as adults discussed her future in clinical terms that reduced her extraordinary gifts to evidence of neglect or abuse. Child Protection Services expressed concerns about her advanced technical knowledge, questioning whether exposure to such sophisticated tools and concepts was appropriate for someone her age. They worried that her isolated lifestyle and intense focus on computer programming indicated developmental problems that required immediate professional intervention. The media discovered the story within 48 hours, transforming their private nightmare into public entertainment as news outlets competed to craft the most sensational headlines about the child hacker who had brought down a major corporation's defenses. Reporters camped outside their apartment building, offering money for exclusive interviews and threatening to publish speculation about Marcus's parenting and Zoe's psychological state if the family refused to cooperate with their coverage demands. Rachel found herself caught between corporate damage control and growing public relations disasters as Phoenix Tech's stock price dropped and clients demanded explanations for security failures that had exposed their own sensitive information. Her board of directors scheduled emergency meetings to discuss potential lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and the complete overhaul of security protocols that would cost the company millions of dollars to implement properly. The worst part was the growing suspicion that the entire incident had been orchestrated as some kind of elaborate extortion scheme. Corporate security experts couldn't believe that a child acting alone could have executed such a sophisticated attack without adult guidance and criminal intent. They theorized that Marcus had been planning the breach for months, using his security access to map vulnerabilities while training his daughter to serve as the perfect, untraceable accomplice who could never be prosecuted as an adult. Legal teams from both Phoenix Tech and the school district began preparing cases that would destroy the Rivera family financially and socially, regardless of the eventual outcome in criminal court. The sheer cost of defending against charges of corporate espionage, computer fraud, and child endangerment would bankrupt Marcus, even if he somehow proved his innocence. His modest savings account and working-class income were no match for the legal resources that powerful institutions could deploy to protect their reputations and recover their losses. Zoe's school suspended her pending the outcome of the investigation, effectively isolating her from the few friends and supportive teachers who might have helped her cope with the trauma of sudden notoriety. Classmates' parents forbade their children from associating with the dangerous hacker girl whose criminal activities had brought negative attention to their community. The isolation compounded her distress as she realized that her attempt to help Tommy had instead created suffering for everyone she cared about most. Tommy Chen himself became collateral damage in the expanding controversy as his family moved him to a different school district to escape the media attention that had transformed him from an invisible victim into an unwilling symbol of cyberbullying awareness. The evidence that Zoe had risked everything to gather disappeared into legal proceedings and administrative bureaucracy, meaning that Derek Martinez faced no consequences for his systematic harassment, while Tommy lost the one advocate who had been willing to fight for justice on his behalf. The psychological evaluation reports painted Zoe as a potentially dangerous individual whose advanced technical abilities combined with apparent social isolation created risks that required constant monitoring and possible institutionalization. Mental health professionals struggled to understand her motivations, interpreting her genuine desire to help others as manipulative behavior designed to mask criminal intent or psychological instability that made her a threat to society. Marcus felt his world collapsing as he watched his daughter retreat into herself, her natural curiosity and joy in learning replaced by fear and self-doubt. The confident child who had once explained complex programming concepts with infectious enthusiasm now questioned whether her abilities were somehow wrong or dangerous. She stopped using her computer entirely, pushing away the books and projects that had once filled her with purpose and happiness. Meanwhile, Rachel Thompson struggled with her own growing doubts about the official narrative that painted the Rivera family as calculating criminals who had violated her trust and damaged her company's reputation. Something about the evidence didn't fit the profile of typical corporate espionage, but admitting uncertainty would undermine the legal strategy that her attorneys insisted was necessary to protect Phoenix Tech from further liability and demonstrate decisive leadership to investors and board members who demanded immediate accountability for the security failures. Rachel Thompson couldn't sleep. For 3 weeks, she had been staring at the ceiling of her penthouse bedroom, replaying every detail of the security breach that had turned her company upside down and destroyed a family's life. The official investigation had concluded that Marcus Rivera and his daughter were responsible for corporate espionage, but something nagged at Rachel's conscience like a persistent ache that wouldn't respond to rational explanations or legal reassurances. The breakthrough came when Rachel decided to examine the actual data that had been accessed during the breach, rather than relying on summaries prepared by her legal team. Working alone in her office at 3 in the morning, she pulled up the forensic reports and began tracing exactly what information had been downloaded from Roosevelt Elementary's systems. What she discovered made her stomach turn with a mixture of horror and shame that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The hacker hadn't stolen financial records, student personal information, or anything that could be sold for profit. Instead, they had methodically documented months of cyberbullying incidents that school administrators had either ignored or failed to recognize. Screenshot after screenshot showed a systematic campaign of digital harassment directed at a quiet boy named Tommy Chen, orchestrated by a group of older students who had used school computers to torment their victim through social media, email, and messaging platforms. The evidence was overwhelming and heartbreaking. Derek Martinez and his friends had created fake accounts to impersonate Tommy online, posting embarrassing content that damaged his reputation with classmates and teachers. They had hacked into his school email to delete important messages from teachers, causing him to miss assignments and face academic penalties. Most disturbing of all, they had discovered Tommy's home address and phone number, using this information to extend their harassment into his family life through anonymous calls and messages that terrified his parents. Rachel realized that the so-called security breach had actually been a desperate rescue mission carried out by a child who had witnessed injustice and possessed the technical skills to gather evidence that adults had failed to collect through traditional channels. Zoe Rivera hadn't committed corporate espionage. She had conducted a digital investigation that exposed serious crimes being committed against a vulnerable student, while school officials remained completely unaware of the systematic abuse happening under their supervision. The moral weight of her discovery crushed Rachel as she understood how completely she had misjudged the situation. Her company's aggressive legal response had punished the very person who had risked everything to protect an innocent victim from continued suffering. The Rivera family had been destroyed not because they were criminals, but because they had cared enough about justice to take action when the system failed to protect those who needed help most. The next morning, Rachel made a decision that shocked everyone in her organization. She called an emergency meeting with her legal team and announced that Phoenix Tech would be withdrawing all charges against Marcus and Zoe Rivera, effective immediately. The lawyers argued frantically that dropping the case would set a dangerous precedent, invite future security breaches, and potentially expose the company to shareholder lawsuits for failing to protect corporate assets with sufficient determination. Rachel listened to their objections with growing impatience before cutting off their protests with a tone that reminded everyone why she had become CEO despite her young age. She explained that Phoenix Tech's reputation would suffer far more damage from prosecuting a child who had exposed school bullying than from admitting that their security systems needed improvement. More importantly, she had built her company on the principle that technology should solve problems and protect people, not punish those who used their abilities to fight injustice. The process of undoing the damage required Rachel to confront the full extent of her company's overreaction and the personal cost that her initial response had inflicted on innocent people. Marcus had been fired from his security position and blacklisted from other employment opportunities, when background checks revealed his connection to the Phoenix Tech incident. The family faced eviction from their apartment as unpaid bills accumulated, while Marcus struggled to find work that would support his daughter's needs. Zoe had withdrawn into complete silence, refusing to touch computers or discuss anything related to programming after weeks of interrogation by investigators who treated her extraordinary abilities as evidence of criminal intent. The confident, curious child, who had once explained complex algorithms with infectious enthusiasm, had been replaced by a frightened little girl who blamed herself for destroying her father's career and their peaceful life together. Rachel's first step toward making amends involved personally visiting the small apartment in Beacon Hill, where the Rivera family was preparing to pack their belongings and move in with distant relatives who had offered temporary shelter. She arrived without bodyguards, assistants, or lawyers, carrying only a handwritten letter of apology and a determination to listen rather than explain or justify her previous actions. The apartment told a story that made Rachel ashamed of her initial assumptions about the family's motivations and character. Zoe's programming books were stacked carefully in boxes, labeled with the same methodical precision that had characterized her approach to learning advanced technical skills. Family photographs showed a happy household built around shared interests and mutual support, not the calculating criminal enterprise that investigators had imagined. Marcus answered the door with the wary expression of someone who had learned not to trust powerful people bearing promises or apologies. His protective instincts had been sharpened by weeks of defending his daughter from accusations and protecting her from media attention that had painted her as either a dangerous prodigy or an exploited victim. Rachel could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of stress that came from fighting battles he had never expected to face. Zoe remained hidden in her bedroom during Rachel's visit, too traumatized by recent events to face another adult who might judge her abilities or question her motives. Rachel could hear the faint sound of crying through the thin walls, and the knowledge that her company's response had broken the spirit of someone so young and talented filled her with a rage directed entirely at herself and the systems that had failed to protect innocence. The conversation with Marcus lasted for hours as Rachel listened to his account of events, from the perspective of a father who had watched his brilliant daughter's gifts being transformed into evidence of criminality by adults who couldn't understand or appreciate her motivations. He explained how Zoe had taught herself programming out of pure curiosity, how she had always used her abilities to help others rather than gain personal advantages, and how the incident at school had grown out of her genuine distress at watching a classmate suffer systematic abuse. Rachel learned that Tommy Chen had been hospitalized after a suicide attempt that occurred just days after his family moved him to escape the media attention surrounding the case. The bullying that Zoe had tried to expose had escalated beyond digital harassment into physical threats that had convinced Tommy that death was preferable to continued torment. The evidence that could have saved him had been buried in legal proceedings while his tormentors faced no consequences for their systematic cruelty. As the full scope of the tragedy became clear, Rachel understood that her company's security breach had been the least important aspect of a story that revealed fundamental failures in how institutions protect vulnerable children from predators who use technology to inflict psychological torture. Zoe Rivera had been the only person with both the technical skills and moral courage to gather evidence that might have prevented Tommy's suffering. But adult bureaucracy had transformed her rescue attempt into a criminal case. The weight of responsibility settled on Rachel's shoulders as she realized that fixing the immediate damage to the Rivera family was only the beginning of a much larger obligation to use her resources and influence to address the systemic problems that had created this tragedy. Phoenix Tech's partnership with the school district provided leverage to demand reforms in how cyberbullying incidents were investigated and addressed, while the company's technology resources could be deployed to develop better tools for protecting students from digital harassment. Rachel's final act that day was asking Marcus for permission to speak with Zoe directly, not as a CEO managing a crisis, but as someone who had learned important lessons about justice, responsibility, and the courage required to fight for others when institutions fail to provide protection. The conversation that followed would change all their lives in ways that none of them could yet imagine, but Rachel approached Zoe's bedroom door with humility rather than authority, ready to listen and learn rather than lecture or defend her previous decisions. Rachel knelt beside Zoe's bed, speaking softly to the small figure curled under a blanket covered with cartoon robots and circuit board patterns. The 8-year-old's eyes were red from crying, but they held a spark of curiosity that hadn't been completely extinguished by weeks of adult judgment and misunderstanding. When Rachel explained that she had discovered the real reason behind the security breach, that she understood Zoe had been trying to help Tommy, the little girl's tears transformed from sadness to relief. "I just wanted the teachers to see what Derek was doing," Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible above the afternoon traffic outside their apartment window. Tommy was so scared, and nobody believed him when he tried to tell them about the messages. "I thought if I could show them the proof, they would make it stop." The simple honesty in her explanation broke Rachel's heart, while simultaneously filling her with admiration for the moral courage that had driven such an extraordinary act of compassion. Rachel's response surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of offering a corporate settlement or legal immunity, she asked Zoe if she would be willing to help Phoenix Tech develop better tools for protecting students from cyberbullying. The proposal wasn't charity or public relations damage control, but a genuine recognition that Zoe's unique combination of technical skills and ethical instincts represented exactly the kind of thinking that technology companies needed to address real-world problems. The partnership that emerged over the following months transformed not just the Rivera family's circumstances, but Rachel's understanding of what leadership and responsibility actually meant. Zoe became Phoenix Tech's youngest consultant, working with professional programmers to design monitoring systems that could detect harassment patterns while protecting student privacy. Her insights into how bullies exploited technological vulnerabilities led to innovations that traditional cybersecurity experts had never considered. Marcus returned to Phoenix Tech in a new role as Director of Educational Security, overseeing the implementation of anti-bullying technologies across school districts throughout the Pacific Northwest. His background as a father and his first-hand experience with institutional failures made him uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between technical solutions and human needs. The position came with a salary that allowed them to move into a larger apartment with a dedicated workspace for Zoe's projects. Rachel found herself spending increasing amounts of time with the Rivera family, initially under the pretense of monitoring the consulting arrangement, but eventually because their home had become a refuge from the corporate loneliness that had defined her adult life. Sunday dinners around their kitchen table, with Zoe excitedly explaining her latest programming discoveries while Marcus cooked meals that filled the apartment with warmth and laughter, reminded Rachel of the family connections she had sacrificed in pursuit of professional success. The transformation in Rachel's priorities became evident to everyone who worked with her. Board meetings that had once focused exclusively on profit margins now included discussions about social responsibility and using technology to solve community problems. She established a foundation dedicated to supporting young people with exceptional abilities, ensuring they received encouragement and resources rather than suspicion and exploitation when their talents emerged. Tommy Chen's recovery became a central focus of their combined efforts. The evidence that Zoe had gathered was finally used to prosecute Derek Martinez and his accomplices for cyberbullying, while Tommy received counseling and support that helped him rebuild his confidence and trust in others. When he was ready, Tommy joined Zoe in testing new anti-bullying software, his experience as a victim providing crucial insights into how harassment affects its targets psychologically and emotionally. The media narrative shifted dramatically as journalists discovered the true story behind the Phoenix Tech security breach. Articles that had initially portrayed Zoe as a dangerous child prodigy were replaced by features celebrating her as a young hero who had risked everything to protect a vulnerable classmate. The family received letters from around the world, with other children sharing their own experiences with bullying and thanking Zoe for her courage in fighting injustice. Phoenix Tech stock price not only recovered from the initial security breach scandal, but reached new heights as investors recognized the company's innovative approach to educational technology and social responsibility. The anti-bullying software developed through Zoe's insights became a standard feature in school districts nationwide, generating both profits and genuine improvements in student safety and well-being. 1 year after the night that had changed everything, Rachel sat in the Rivera family's new living room, watching Zoe teach programming basics to a group of younger children whose parents had enrolled them in the coding club she had started at the community center. The scene perfectly captured how far they had all traveled from that moment of crisis when misunderstanding and fear had threatened to destroy innocent lives. Marcus brought Rachel a cup of coffee and settled beside her on the comfortable couch that had replaced the mismatched furniture from their old apartment. They watched in comfortable silence as Zoe patiently helped a 6-year-old understand the logic behind a simple animation program, her natural teaching instincts evident in every gesture and explanation. The confident, joyful child had returned, but with new wisdom about both the power and responsibility that came with exceptional abilities. Rachel realized that the security breach had been the best thing that ever happened to her company, not because of the technological improvements it had prompted, but because it had forced her to remember why she had fallen in love with technology in the first place. Computing wasn't about profit margins or market dominance, but about using human ingenuity to solve problems and connect people across distances and differences that had once seemed insurmountable. The evening ended with Zoe demonstrating her latest project, a program designed to help elderly residents at local nursing homes video chat with distant family members. As Rachel watched this 8-year-old genius explain how technology could bring generations together, she understood that some gifts were too precious to be measured in corporate terms. True innovation came from hearts that cared about making the world better, one connection at a time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. The conference room erupted into chaos as the computer screens went black. Rachel Thompson, CEO of Phoenix Tech Solutions, stared in disbelief as her multi-million-dollar presentation vanished before the eyes of potential investors. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But what happened next would change everything she thought she knew about justice, family, and the incredible power of an 8-year-old's determination to protect the innocent. Marcus Rivera never imagined that working the night shift as a security guard at Phoenix Tech Solutions would lead to the most extraordinary chapter of his life. At 32, he had been patrolling the gleaming corridors of the downtown Seattle headquarters for nearly 2 years, his footsteps echoing through empty offices while the city slept outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The job paid enough to cover rent on their small apartment in Beacon Hill, keep food on the table, and occasionally splurge on the coding books that his daughter Zoe devoured with an intensity that both amazed and worried him. Zoe Rivera was unlike any 8-year-old Marcus had ever encountered. While her classmates spent their afternoons playing video games or watching cartoons, she sat, hunched over her second-hand laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard as she taught herself programming languages with the dedication of a scholar pursuing a doctorate. Python, JavaScript, HTML, even complex cybersecurity protocols, nothing seemed beyond her grasp. She approached each new challenge like a detective solving mysteries, finding patterns in code that adults with computer science degrees struggled to understand. The apartment they shared told the story of their journey together. Marcus had been raising Zoe alone since her mother Linda died in a car accident when Zoe was just 4 years old. The living room doubled as Zoe's classroom and laboratory, with stacks of programming books borrowed from the public library covering every available surface. Her drawings of computer circuits and flowcharts decorated the refrigerator alongside typical childhood artwork, creating a unique gallery that perfectly captured her extraordinary mind. Marcus often wondered where Zoe's incredible gift had originated. Neither he nor Linda had possessed any particular aptitude for technology, though Linda had always encouraged their daughter's curiosity about how things worked. Perhaps it was genetics expressing itself in unexpected ways. Or maybe it was Zoe's natural problem-solving instincts finding their perfect outlet in the logical world of computer programming. Whatever the source, Marcus supported his daughter's passion completely, even when it meant sacrificing his own needs to buy her the equipment and resources that fed her insatiable hunger for knowledge. Their evening routine had become a cherished ritual. Marcus would return from his security rounds to find Zoe still awake, despite his repeated reminders about bedtime, working on some new project that had captured her imagination. She might be designing a simple game, exploring network security protocols, or practicing ethical hacking techniques she had discovered in online tutorials. Her concentration was absolute, her joy in understanding complex systems infectious, and her natural instinct to use technology for helping others rather than personal gain reminded Marcus daily of her mother's generous spirit. Meanwhile, 30 floors above Marcus's security station, Rachel Thompson inhabited a world of boardrooms, power lunches, and decisions that affected thousands of employees across multiple continents. As the youngest CEO in Phoenix Tech Solutions history, She had inherited both the company and the immense pressure that came with managing a technology empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Her corner office overlooked Elliott Bay, its panoramic views serving as a constant reminder of how far she had climbed from her middle-class roots in Portland.